Today's presentation that you folks are doing on Tempest has some connection with the pandemic because in Tempest we see this isolation occurring, and likewise we suffer a lot during the pandemic, although we are in a post-pandemic phase right now. So the Tempest is time transcending, and as my audience, you will see that how these students have done a wonderful job creating that time transcending moment when you could resolve the problem that are occurring even today, although Tempest was written more than 400 years ago. And that's why we call Shakespeare global Shakespeare. And also you can see the name of the panel, post-colonial. So the students will bring it out in their presentation. It also creates a discourse on what we call diversity today and race through various characters. I think on that note, I give the podium to my beloved students. Thank you.
Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Juliana. I majored in English major, and today we are going to be sharing with you the magic in Tempest. The presence of magic throughout the play, The Tempest, becomes a pillar that the protagonist uses to both communicate and use the other characters. In some respects, magic can be seen as a positive driving force that helps Prospero throughout his journey, while it can also be seen as his crutch towards manipulation and greed. In the beginning of Prospero's reign, he shows no remorse for having caused disaster at sea. Instead, he speaks to his daughter Miranda about how his brother overthrew him as Duke of Milan. This is the catalyst behind his controlling behavior towards various other characters. It can be inferred that Prospero is using his magic as a way to regain power. Following this point, although Prospero's brother overtook his role, Prospero still failed as a ruler. So could he be trying to make up for his poor leadership in the past? There are two characters that react to Prospero's magic the strongest. Ariel, a spirit that performs Prospero's supernatural deeds, and Miranda, his daughter. However, rather than using his magic against her, he uses it to help her and her love interest Ferdinand. These contrasting concepts are those that further the point to the fact that although Prospero uses his magic to control, he also uses it for good. Prospero and Ariel are a team throughout the events in the play. They rely on one another to navigate the various conflicts that arise. Ariel is introduced in the second act of Scene 1, and immediately begins retelling his version of the shipwreck, giving the readers confirmation that although it was Prospero's order, it was Ariel's job to carry out. By the end of the play, Prospero decides to free Ariel and cease to use magic, in order to return as Duke of Milan. This message brings light to the question, does Prospero give up magic for a good cause, or because he finally got what he wanted? Any questions?
Okay, hi. My name is Sajan Hines. I'm a freshman and I'm an entertainment media major. And here's my paper on the Tempest. So following the aftermath of being cast away into isolation by Antonio, his brother, the negative thoughts and feelings that Prospero harbors while being left alone all those years on the island culminated into the storm that he created with the help of Ariel. This was an external tempest to mimic the one that manifested within his mind, along with all the other magic that he wields, to therefore manipulate those of the kingdom that betrayed him all that time ago. Magic in the Tempest acts as a catalyst in uncovering the hidden motives of those trapped on the island and developing their true innate humanistic qualities where, without the magic, they would have remained static the entire time. For instance, magic allowed Prospero to find out what Antonio was planning in trying to get Sebastian to betray the throne, along with all the individual desires of the rest of the ship's riders. And therefore he wouldn't have known how to make them repent for what they did, as well as make the rest of the people on the ship learn their lessons, aside from that. While many of those stranded on the island have negative motivations driving them, we see that on the other hand, Ferdinand and Miranda merely only deal with falling in love with one another, no matter how staged their meeting may be by Prospero. All Miranda knew on the island was her father and Caliban, and even so, she holds the most humanistic qualities out of everyone in the story. And through Prospero's dealings of magic, she gets to witness the world that she missed while stuck on the island. Miranda believes wholeheartedly wholeheartedly that everyone has goodness in them, and she's a literal representation of the good in the world, which is like Prospero's insight as to what a person is at their barest being, and this is the reason why he doesn't let his magic affect her and he hides Ariel from her, because she doesn't need any change, unlike the rest of the characters. As the play wraps up, we find Prospero in the position of returning to his homeland and abandoning the one thing that he kept constant through his time on the island, which is his magic. His magic gave him great power and the ability to right all wrongs set against him, and he needed his magic in order to forgive his brother and forgive everything that happened to him. It enabled him to experience a well-needed period of catharsis that he was unable to reach after 12 years in isolation. He could take out his anger and take out his frustrations, and in the end still be able to keep his sanity and reason to him as he put his life back together again. By letting go of his magic, Prospero essentially left his past behind him and chose to focus on the future that lay ahead. Magic in the Tempest served a larger purpose than adding a sense of the supernatural. It ensured that the characters involved would evolve and mature. Magic enabled everyone to separate themselves from their own internal tempest, whether it be for power or for love, just like how Prospero found his.
Question for Julia. Do you think that Prospero is morally good at the end of the play after losing his powers?
Yes, I do. The reason that he gave up his powers is so he could stop using the other characters and decides to begin independently as Juliana.
Question for Seisha. Who do you think was most impacted by Prospero's magic?
I definitely think that Prospero was the one that was impacted most. He chose to let it go in the end, and everything that he experienced was because of his magic on the island. So,
yeah. All right. That says Humanism in the Tempest. I wrote mine on magic. I don't know what happened there, but anyways, because magic is the most constant and relevant theme in the Tempest, it is also the basis of the plot. The opening scene is meant to show the power of Prospero's magic, and it foreshadows the rest of the play. This is purposeful. Shakespeare wants to show the audience the power of magic in his story, and he does that by shipwrecking the crew in the very first scene. Before the audience learns in the second scene that it was Ariel and Prospero's magic that took the ship down, they are left to think that a storm is actually to blame. Shakespeare does this by using a few props and a believable, eloquent script with stage directions to make the scene appear that it was truly a storm to the audience. Not only is Prospero's magic the thing that tricks the characters in the story, but Shakespeare's writing/magic makes the audience believe that it was a storm that caused the shipwreck. Even we, as the viewers, are tricked by Shakespeare's magic.
Throughout reading and analysis, I found that power, or simply influence, and magic are joined by the common link of ancient Greek and Roman mythology throughout the Tempest. Imagery of powerful beings from classical lore are included consistently within the play, and this is a reflection of their prominence within Renaissance humanism, the whole Renaissance period, where the influence of the classical civilizations were really influential on human successes and kind of intellectual movements in general. And Prospero in the Tempest is seen aligning himself specifically with gods through his magical abilities, as of drawing a direct comparison between his human being and immense power from him. Within an explanation of the lengths of his own power, Prospero refers to his arts in line with those of the king of gods. Quote, I've bedimmed the noontide sun, called forth the mutinous winds, and twixt the green sea the hazard full, set roaring warm to the dread rattling thunder have I put fire, and rifted Jove's stout oak with his own bolt. Unquote. Jove, or Jupiter from Roman mythology, is immensely powerful in his position as king of gods, and this level of influence seems to be Prospero's main inspiration throughout his quest for the restoration of both his own political and mystical power. By executing his plans for his own reinstatement as Duke of Milan, Prospero exerts his magic over every group and individual on the island, as if he were a divine being of myth, equal in ability to Jupiter himself. Through his own magical talents, as well as those of the spirit Ariel, Prospero interferes with naturally occurring weather events, for example, With his control over Ariel, Prospero continues to connect himself to classical beings and their seemingly endless power, as he explicitly asks the spirit to take forms of two immensely powerful creatures from myth to carry out his wishes, one a water nymph and two the harpy. In Greek mythology, the water nymph holds power over all bodies of water, and the harpy is a personification of storm winds in general and is the servant of Zeus, who is the Greek equivalent of Rome's Jupiter. Under Prospero's sole control, Ariel creates shipwrecking storms and manipulates the groups of stranded men who had wronged his master. Acting as a god delegating the task of maintaining the lives of mortals, Prospero directs Ariel to monitor and guide the stranded noblemen across the island until Prospero decides they have spent enough time struggling and he is ready to return to Europe with them. It is apparent that Prospero found the most strength and power in portraying himself as a mythical ruler in contrast to his servants and enemies and as an equal to the gods of the classical world.
My name is DeMuro, and I've also wrote my paper on Prospero and his magic. And Prospero was the most powerful human being on both the whole world, in that world. And he used magic as a sort of a way, as a source of power. He needed Ariel to control that power because he was still a human, and so he wouldn't be able to control that power without Ariel. And I kind of used it to compare it as an athlete who uses drugs to boost their performances, and when he stopped using that power, he realized that he was a much more stronger without it, and much more popular without it.
Hi, my name is Allison, and I chose to present on the post-coloniality aspect of the play Tempest by William Shakespeare. And I chose to present on this because I thought that it was a pretty prominent theme throughout the play. And there's also a lot of controversy surrounding it, and there's multiple interpretations of it. So I thought that it would be interesting to get my own interpretation and compare it to other ones. So after analyzing the play, I came to the conclusion that Caliban represents those who were enslaved by colonization. And I think that Caliban is used as a tool by William Shakespeare to show his own feelings on the topic. So throughout the play, readers typically feel sad for Caliban, and they usually feel mad at Prospero for his mistreatment of Caliban, because Caliban suffered a lot of abuse at Prospero's hands. And through talking to others in the class discussions, I was able to come to the conclusion that even those who liked Prospero as a character were still angry and disappointed with his actions, which I think was Shakespeare's intention. So in the real world, I think that the readers' pity for Caliban kind of translates in the real world to readers feeling sorry for those who were enslaved by colonization. And this conclusion is able to be drawn because Caliban represents those who were enslaved by colonization because he was colonized by Prospero. Prospero stole the island from Caliban and from his mother, and then enslaved Caliban, which represents colonization in a huge way. So I think that William Shakespeare intends for readers to feel sadness for Caliban, and for that sadness to translate into sadness and empathy for the victims of colonization, and to think of it negatively as a concept. And in the real world, I think that readers' anger at Prospero is able to be translated into anger at colonizers and to start to think badly of them. So in this way, William Shakespeare uses Caliban and Prospero as tools to show his criticism of racism, colonization, and slavery. And I did some further research, and from the source Are We Being Historical Yet? A Colonial Interpretation of Tempest, of William Shakespeare's Tempest, I was able to find further evidence which included that Prospero's conquistorial activities were a product of his anger that his dukedom was stolen by his brother, and his colonizing was a product of tyranny, which is cruel and oppressive government rule, which is essentially rule by enslavement. And I think that William Shakespeare was able to kind of depend on the fact that it would be obvious to most of the readers that anger and tyranny are innately bad and their consequences are bad. And so the play as a whole comments that colonization is overtly bad. And I think that Ariel is part of Shakespeare's critique on racism and oppression as well, because Ariel was a slave to Prospero, just in a different way. He had to work endlessly for his freedom from the colonizer Prospero, which to me represents indentured servants, in the way that he had to work tirelessly to earn freedom from Prospero, who claimed to have saved him, but in reality he just enslaved him in a different way. So overall, I would say that the play transcends the negative feelings of Shakespeare's time, such as racism, oppression, and colonialism, which were all much more prominent in the past. And I think that William Shakespeare shows his disapproval of these concepts throughout times.
So, Allison, you mentioned that Caliban had an important role in sort of displaying Shakespeare's, argument against colonialist behaviors. So, how might this message be different, or possibly similar, without sort of this Caliban role being filled? So, in other words, do you think Shakespeare's message would still be as powerful, sort of with or without Caliban?
I think that it would be much less powerful because although Ariel does still represent Shakespeare's negative comments towards oppression and racism, I think it's more difficult to draw the comparison of William Shakespeare talking about colonialism with Ariel, just because the land in the island was never owned by Ariel, so he never had his land stolen from him like Caliban did, because he never owned the land.
And Zach, your discussion about Prospero's magic sort of as the main theme of your essay, how do you think that the Tempest would have been different, or if Shakespeare didn't sort of give Prospero this magical and important role?
Well, I think that if there was like no magic in the play, the plot would change entirely, and overall like the meaning would also change, I feel. And a lot of some of the characters are based off of magic, like Prospero and Ariel, so they would be dramatically affected if it was not entered into the play. So I think that the story and the characters would change a lot if it was not included.
I'm Tilton. I'm a junior and I'm a film instruction major. And I'm going to be presenting about Prospero and his slightly tyrannical character plot and how he kind of uses that to his advantage to enslave and control the others on the island. So in Shakespeare's The Tempest, the character Prospero plays an arguably one of the most significant roles. I say arguably because of his either played as a powerful and magnanimous man or as a cruel sorcerer. Depends on how we look at the plot and kind of look at the context of his character. But looking at what he did with specifically Ariel and Caliban, you can see that he used his powers in order to kind of manipulate and get at what he would like an outcome to be, what events he would like to see on the island. So specifically I'm focusing on Ariel Moore. And Ariel is another magical being in the story or fairy, and he is in debt to Prospero, or so he thinks. Prospero is holding the fact that he was slave to the Sycorax, which is a evil witch-like creature on the island, and that he was held over a spell, and Prospero continues to hold this over Ariel as a way of keeping him working the tasks that he would like to see, as I said before, completed on the island. And Ariel seems to trust Prospero quite easily. This was confusing to me as I kept reading because Ariel himself is also a powerful being. So I always wondered while reading that if Ariel is just as powerful, if not more powerful, than Prospero, is he living out of fear, or is he genuinely believing that Prospero is helping him? Because if he genuinely believes that, then it kind of falls under Prospero again using his power to manipulate and control the thoughts of others, which is, again, still why I believe that Prospero's character follows a slightly tyrannical character plot throughout the story.
Okay, so I'm Katie. and I wanted to start off by asking the audience a question. Just by a show of hands, how many people have seen The Tempest before? So The Tempest is unlike any other play Shakespeare has produced. For example, it all takes place in one day, and it's full of magic, which is not like any other play he's made. And another notable aspect of magic in The Tempest is music. And I often think that that element of magic is overlooked, because when we're watching movies and TVs every day, there's always background noise and music. But we don't think about how it adds to the game. Music is one of the most frequent demonstrations of magic in The Tempest, and according to Caliban, the island is full of sounds and noises, which creates a very mysterious and magical setting for the play. In the opening scene of the play, there is an intense storm, which is powered by Prospero, and he shipwrecks the group of men that have betrayed him. The shipwreck was obviously motivated by the anger he feels toward those men. And the way Prospero uses his magic throughout the entire play could symbolize his internal pain that he feels by being betrayed by his brother and all other men. So the storm consisted of loud crashes of thunder and lightning, which adds certain emotions to the play that also contrasts with the theme of magic. And of course, you can't forget to mention Ariel when you're talking about music in The Tempest. Ariel himself is a magical being and uses music to hypnotize other characters in the play in order to help Prospero in many different ways. Ariel is also the most musical character in the play, and the songs he sings makes the characters act in certain ways and has magical effects on them. For instance, putting a love charm on Ferdinand to help them fall in love with each other. Ariel is invisible to everyone except Prospero, and Prospero does not hesitate to use it to his advantage. Another example of Ariel using using music in the form of magic is in Act 1, Scene 2. And he uses a song to calm the stormy seas after Prospero created that huge storm. Shakespeare's play The Tempest is full of magical elements, but the use of magic is a constant element throughout the entire play.
I'll be presenting about how Prospero used magic as a tool of colonization. So in The Tempest, the main character Prospero shows a deep dedication of books and learning. His interest in learning even goes as far as to get him usurped from power by his brother. He continues to study magic while he's exiled, eventually becoming extremely powerful. He uses this power only to manipulate the lives of those around him and rise to power on this island. It's clear throughout the story that Prospero doesn't just read to expand his knowledge, but rather as a way of establishing power. He may have pursued learning innocently while he was the Duke of Milan, but after he is usurped, magic merely becomes an avenue to revenge. He repeatedly uses magic to control various people who live or come to land on his island. Caliban, for example, is only afraid of Prospero because of the old man's magic abilities. It is even referenced that Caliban has been tortured in the past by Prospero's magic. When others come to land on the island by Prospero's interference, he works to control their lives as well. He creates schemes that will create issues between them and seemingly teach them a lesson. It can be noted that while he works to create a positive relationship between Ferdinand and Miranda, he's doing this by still manipulating their lives. Prospero feels he is right and enjoys this power he gets while playing God. He's rarely ever using magic for actual good, but what he feels is justified. One character in particular should be noted, as others have spoken about, which is Ariel. Ariel is Prospero's loyal servant who carries out his every wish. However, Ariel is doing this against his will because of the magic Prospero is using against him. Ariel begs on multiple occasions to be set free. Instead of granting this wish, Prospero simply points out how awful Ariel's life used to be and reminds him that he's bound to Prospero until he completes his duties. It isn't till the magician has seemingly learned his lesson at the end of the play that he frees Ariel, but that makes the reader consider if he even would have done that given his change of heart. He still gives Ariel one more task at the end before he can even be set free. Prospero justified his magic to control Caliban because he saw Caliban as an evil monster. Here, unlike Caliban, Prospero uses his magic against a benevolent spirit against his wishes. It's clear throughout the play that Prospero uses his magic for controlling the lives of others to his own advantage. He has apparently learned his lesson at the end of the play when he gives up his magic. However, he does this not as a selfless act, but after he has been put back into place of power as the Duke of Milan. He is merely trading one form of power for another. Prospero will continue to choose power in his life, and magic is simply a tool to colonize and control others.
My first question is for Dana. Is Prospero charming, or does he simply use violence to assert control?
I feel like he's almost turned his charm into a violent threat. He's used both a combination of charm and charisma to kind of just discuss, to manipulate, like I said earlier, others into believing either what he wants them to or agreeing with him about a certain task that needs to be completed. For example, like someone else previously said, he protects Miranda at all costs, so he puts her every time in he talks to Ariel or gives him tasks, he will put Miranda in a sleep-like state where he is able to control when she is allowed to wake up. So, yes, it may come off as charm and charisma, but I think he's also kind of hiding behind that to make it seem like he's not actually hurting anybody.
And Katie, how does music influence the emotion of audience members?
So, to go back to the original example I had about the opening scene of the play, with all the loud thunder and the lightning striking, to anyone who hasn't seen the play before and just going to see it, that could be very confusing for them. They don't know what's going on. It could also make them curious about what's going to happen next, or kind of scared because it is such an intense scene to open up the play with.
And Julia, in what ways does Prospero's relationship with Caliban show post-colonial aspects of the play?
Yeah, so it's very clear, especially in stage interpretations when you see it, that often Caliban is interpreted as a person of color, and this starkly reflects how Prospero is coming to this island, usurping the indigenous spirits or people there, and then torturing them and making him do his duties. It clearly reflects how in the past settlers would come to islands or different places and usurp power and then obviously enslave or subjugate the natives.
Hi, I'm Jordan, and I wrote my paper on how power and magic are symbolic. And I wrote about if power can lead to greed, then magic and power are one and the same. If once man has a taste of power, they're not going to want to let it go. And we see that through Prospero, Ariel's, and Caliban's relationship.
So Jordan, how does Prospero's use of magic demonstrate the post-colonial aspect of the play?
Well, as I said again, it's power, so he doesn't want to give it up, and if it wants somebody else, he's gonna be blinded by that power, just what's good and what's wrong.
My name is Daniel. I'm an IDS major, interdisciplinary studies major, and I'll be getting my degree in global and political studies. My group's question was, how does the Tempest demonstrate the theme of colonialism? Colonialism is a practice or policy of control by one people or power over other people or areas, often by establishing colonies and generally with the aim of economic dominance. In the process of colonization, colonizers may impose their religion, language, economics, and other cultural practices to pursue this goal. In The Tempest, it proves this at the very beginning of the play, when Prospero causes a bad storm and the crewmen and captain are giving demands to members of a higher cultural capital in order to keep everyone aboard safe. However, the ruler still believes he is in charge and not to take orders from the captain simply because he is richer and the ruler of the land, despite his authority of being king, having no prowess in keeping everyone safe during the storm, nor does it involve keeping a ship afloat during a bad storm. Throughout the play, Prospero uses his power of magic in the pursuit of his own personal vengeance. He does not care for others' suffering. Prospero is not honest to those in his life, his slave, magical assistant, or daughter. He continues to put others in harm's way due to his own frustration and emotions through his abuse of magic. He follows his own free will based off of this rather than what is righteous. Towards the end of the play, Prospero comes to his senses and starts using his magic for good. Essentially, negative abusive magic also showed the true self-consumed mindsets that each character trapped on the island had, pertaining to their safety and survival. So, in some ways, in the midst of his own personal vengeance, he was able to prove his point that most were not worried for the general good of the group, only themselves. This abuse of power, as well as exposing of self-consumed agendas, still plays true today in other aspects of life, especially amongst people in higher socioeconomic capitals.
To reiterate what Daniel has said, we were talking back specifically to the title Tempest, which when I had looked it up, it made an uproar of a dangerous storm, and it's internalized with his pain within himself. And we also wanted to bring that back to Tempest, the title, because it talks about vengeance and violence regards into magic, what you were saying. And bringing it back to Prospero, I thought it was important to talk about how he uses magic in a way to gain power. After he was betrayed by his brother, he caused an upright storm, and the majority of the plot was him using magic in a negative way to regain the power that he had lost. Unfortunately, he does misuse the power, and it leaves him weak in a state of confusion in the end, but it does gain him some power that it's like, when you have power, it doesn't mean you're supposed to abuse it. When you have that authoritative figure, you're supposed to know how to use it in a positive way, but he took that and he used it in a dangerous way where he caused everyone on the island, his daughter, his servants and lords, and he put them in impossible situations where they had to fight for their lives, and it was very chaotic. But I wanted to also talk about how he used it to trick people, which is a mind thing, which we don't really talk about much, but it's just ironic how Tempest is about power and control, and going back to humanism with that humanity sense. Humanism is when you have that supernatural aspect of something, but also you know it's about human needs, and he knew what they needed and he used that against them in a way to get control and power. So I thought that was pretty crazy for me, honestly, and I just thought it was funny how he brought all his enemies onto one island just to use them, and that was basically the whole moral of the story.
Okay, so Daniel, you talked about Prospero's abuse of magic. So how do you think that abuse of magic correlates to modern day society abuse of power?
Throughout class, my professor, she was just talking about the pandemic and how the abuse of power can still happen during that. So I just wrote, during the pandemic, many Americans, not all, but many, overtly abused their power of freedom of choice by rebelling against mandates put in place to keep the general population safe and COVID-free. Many around the world also abused this power of freedom of choice, but today we're focusing on the United States. Members of higher cultural capitals who agreed with this rebellion used their status and/or political backing to support these inhumane acts of libertarianism amongst these Americans. Members of the general public went as far as to protest and hold demonstrations showing their opposition of personal protection protocols during the pandemic. If this is not modern day abuse of power through our freedom of choice, then I do not know what is.
Describe how humanism contrasts with the idea that magic is evil or goodwill.
Okay, yeah, just as I was just stating, with humanism, it's the idea of supernaturalism and that aspect of human needs and humanity, and everyone has free choice and free will, bringing it with what Daniel was saying. So yeah, I think it's important to see how the two clash together, because with magic, it's kind of that supernatural sci-fi fantasy that we all think is that good aspect, but we've never seen it turn to evil. So I think when you put magic with people are still, we're like all animals in a sense, you know, like we're all like, as the pandemic you saw, we were all going crazy over Lysol, like things like that, like toilet paper, things that were like, we should have enough of, but because our natural state, we are animals, we are ruthless at times. I think think that people forget that we can have that good aspect, but that evil aspect at the same time, that people have a choice whether they want to be good or bad. That's just how humanity is. So I think that's important to remember.
Very good presentations, I enjoyed, and I'm sure my faculty colleague, I think, please ask some questions, but my main question, is to all the groups, as a general question, which is, so what you spoke profoundly and exhaustively almost on the theme of magic. So the question is, as you can see, the title of the panel or title of the symposium theme, that we are focusing on global post-colonial Shakespeare. And I think the last group, and I think one of the other groups resonated very much that theme, because you were addressing the pandemic. And it was very interesting. So I would like to hear from all of the other groups regarding the video that we studied by Stephen Greenblatt, the great Shakespeare scholar from Harvard, and his interpretation through new historicism and the way he is talking about interpreting pandemic through Tempest, because historical events, if they just stay in the realm of history, then as he's arguing as a Shakespeare scholar, it's of no use, whether it has a time transcending effect. So this is Shakespeare's last play, and it has that time transcending quality that we can even use it in today's discourse, in today's life, the life of pandemic that we are living and the isolation. So some thoughts, those of you who did not get time, we rushed a little bit. I want you to address that a little bit. Yes.
Well, like Shakespeare's stories will always live on because they're always going to get critiqued through on and get more modernized. So like, if this is gonna there's always gonna be something connected to what's happening today. So like, it's kind of crazy to think about people who write stuff about problems that they had in their time are still having it now. So you get to see the connection.
Yes, David.
Kind of going with that, I also feel that just like we've done in this class, we analyze it and we interpret it and we give the perspective to it every single time we look at it. I feel like that's applicable to all like Shakespeare plays or all his works and other like things that have been deemed classics, because there's always going to be a new way to interpret it. There's always going to be a new perspective you can take on it. So I think, like Jordan said, it's always going to be modernized because of that.
Yes.
Kind of building off what Dana says, like how we're interpreting it now and being like really similar to the pandemic. If we went back like 3 years ago, like we would interpret it probably differently because we weren't in the pandemic. So I think like as like time goes on, everyone just like interprets it and like what it relates to differently.
And that's that Stephen Gilbert interprets. He brought in a very good point that it depends on the context. There's time is evolving. New historicism.
It depends on experience.
So, what did I would like to hear a little bit more from Jerry on this topic, and also I was thinking of Alison because you two focused more on listening.
On the humanism aspect?
Humanism versus
The post-colonial. Yeah, for the colonialism is basically when someone tries to have like one nation under their control. So I thought that was big for Prospero because he had a whole island where he enslaved and colonized, and then also tried to have that power to control everyone and their actions. When he basically used Ariel to do all his dirty work for him to then confuse and have everyone in a state of like trance, so like he could have his way, when it was all just because he was fighting demons within himself. So I think that goes back to the post-colonialism and humanism at the same time, but then it also has that magic interpretation because he uses that supernatural aspect to get them all under his control and have his needs met.
One last question. So, as I say in the abstract, that do you think Shakespeare, through magic, toward the end of the play, as I said, this is his last play, and he was able to overcome all negativity that is there in the play because, yes, we're nodding the head, yeah. So let me hear that.
It doesn't bridge all the negativity that he caused throughout the whole play, because I feel like there's still going to be the damage, there's still going to be whatever they went through, that's not going to disappear. And the outcome is always going to be in his favor because he's the one who gets to go back to normal, and they're kind of left there after getting used to being controlled and put under this. Now they have to figure out kind of how to live again day to day.
And there has been a controversy whether Shakespeare was racist or he's portraying or exposing discourse on race, because finally we see that he does not release Caliban. Caliban is still there enslaved, and Caliban yields to Prospero. So those confusion remains toward the end, and I think by one of the class discussion we did, we harped on it quite a bit. Although the play ends with his magical comment that we are made of, that our life is made of dream, and our life is rounded with the sleep. We are made of dream. We are such stuff as dreams are made of, and our life is rounded with the sleep. So, Julia, any comments on that?
I would just go off of what Dana was saying about, I don't think it's like resolved at the end. He doesn't get rid of all that negativity just because while like the issue of the colonization is addressed, there's no like kind of resolution to it. The only person who is freed is Ariel, and that's only after like having to do one more task for Prospero. And you see at the end that Caliban still has to like serve him or still is tortured. There's not kind of a resolution of almost Prospero like getting, or Caliban or Ariel getting like what's deserved for them, which I think kind of leaves a sense of there is still some kind of negative impact of Prospero.
I want to add on what you said. It's like if the outcome and everything was resolved, that would be like a dream. Like that wouldn't happen usually in life, because life doesn't work like that. Not everything's sunshine and rainbows at the end of the day.
So do we then conclude that this is a juxtaposition of magic versus reality, or that is Shakespeare's message, that we combine the both, again repeating those lines? We are such stuff as dreams are made on. Our life is rounded with a sleep. So it is nothing but a sleep. And we do need magic, but maybe it should be qualified with some kind of exposure to reality as well. And the forgiveness, and I think we talked about that, is a great theme as well. So anyone would like to address that? Any group?
I think to also go off of that, it kind of puts the theme of how far is one willing to go for a desired reality, because Prospero seems to not stop until he gets what he wants, regardless of what it takes for him to get there.
Well, I think, Prospero wanted the forgiveness from people that wronged him, but he didn't take accountability for the harm that he caused to Caliban and Ariel and the people on the island. So I think, that idea of forgiveness is sort of a little twisted, that he wants it from others, but he's not willing to take accountability for himself and the harm that he's done to others. So thank you.
I want to add on that because like Prospero thinks of him as like the savior, like the white savior and saving everything. It's like the colonizers thought they were saving the indigenous people and all of that when they were actually killing them and enslaving them. So like it's like blinded by like your own like privilege and your own like savior complex basically.
So the last question is, just that why do you think then it is justified that, because in the beginning, like it was written in 16th century, the play, and for 400 years, almost 350 years, the play was considered only as a play on magic and supernaturalism. But suddenly from 1960s onwards, we have the group of literary critics who shape the direction, saying that no, it also gives birth to post-colonial discourse, a discourse on race. And that's why I introduce you to those articles. And that gives also Shakespeare a more elevated status in terms of what we call globalism, not globalization. Globalism, universal love. So, question is, to what extent do you think it is justified? I mean, do you think that Shakespeare does create that kind of ontology in terms of race discourse, or exposing, even if he doesn't transcend, he's exposing those kind of issues that prevailed even in society back then? And Greenblatt is in his video talks about the 1490 that time in 1492 when a lot of people were brought in as slaves from Africa, and Shakespeare observed that, and he could not make Calvin free or make him win, but he does address that, although there is a controversy. Yes, so I think you are nodding your head. I would like to hear.
I guess he really couldn't do much to change the times, so he put it in his work. And by showing, I feel like by showing the Duke not really caring what the captain of the ship was saying just because they're poor or from a lower class, just proves that they didn't really care for lower class people, because if you weren't on the same level as them or held the same power, then your word or your expertise meant nothing to them.
Thank you. Interpreting all historical events in the contemporary context. He talks about that, internet, and living in isolation means almost giving up. Like with all the robots, he says, living in Western society, he's referring to dishwasher, everything as robot, and maybe Shakespeare wants us to get rid of some of those devices. So, yeah, thank you.
I believe that by being by himself and surrounded just within the room, that he had more time to learn about his magic and concentrate more on how to use it to benefit himself and his power, instead of making people feel like he gets the thing.
So, kind of generally for all, as we know, the whole theme was post-colonialism, and we talked about Renaissance humanism, we talked about magic, and we talked about humanism. Is there any other theme, besides, those are the three main ones that we kind of dived into, the magic, the Renaissance humanism, and the post-colonialism. Is there any other theme that anyone thinks popped out, Katie touched upon the magic? Is there anything else that you can touch upon, Julie?
I wanted to talk about the betrayal. I was kind of paying more attention to that while I was listening to everybody's essays, because in my essay, I brought light to the better sides of Prospero and how giving up magic was kind of a positive thing. But as I was listening to everybody else's essays, I really thought it was important to discuss the betrayal part of it, and how Prospero was betrayed, and how then Prospero betrayed Caliban, and how he betrayed Ariel. I think that's very interesting to me. I didn't think about that.
Yes. So, but at the same time, at the end, there is forgiveness. But I think Caliban was not forgiven or released, but I feel very bad about it, that it would have ended on a more positive note. So that's the only rationale.
Yeah, I was going to say, if